Hello, true believers, and welcome to the To Infinity Podcast, your podcast for all your MCU needs. I'm Rashad, one of your hosts.
I'm Robert, one of your other hosts.
I'm Zach, the other host.
And this week we'll be talking about Thor. So, I actually wanted to... I'm really interested in hearing your guys' opinions about this movie, because going back and rewatching it and not seeing it since I originally watched it back in like 2011, 2012, because I didn't even go see this movie in the theaters. I saw it like on TV or on DVD or something. I can't even remember. And I remember thinking like, oh, it was okay. But, flash forward 9-10 years later and going back and watching this movie, I really enjoyed it. Like,
yeah,
what you guys
I feel
think?
the same way, because like I saw it in theaters, and I think I saw it like on TV or something one time, and I remember it being okay and like not super impressive, but going back and watching it last night, I was like, this is better than I thought it was. I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, it's the kind of the takeaway I took is I think I had gotten tired of origin stories. We'd seen Spider-Man so many different times, and Batman and Superman, but it was kind of refreshing to see an origin story for a hero that I don't know a lot about, and like especially in the context of the wider cinematic universe now, I like it a lot more, just like you guys, on this repeat viewing than I did the first go around. So
yeah, I think I totally agree with what you're saying about it being another origin story, because I think at the time I was already like ready for Avengers. I was like, I don't want to sit through another 5 Marvel movies. Come on, get to the big one. Do the big one now.
Yeah, let's just get the big fight. Get all the guys in the room and let them do their thing. But
yeah,
this was a nice stop along the way with several years between now and when it first came out. And I also I did notice a couple of things right off the gate that I didn't notice before. Doing some reading and watching it. The name of the town, which I don't think is actually ever mentioned in the movie, but it's in the script and stuff, is Puente Antiguo, which is Spanish for ancient bridge, which is kind of a nice nod to the Bifrost.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, showing up so many times. And also, if you see like in one of the first shots of the town, there's a billboard in the back that says "Home of the Vikings," which I guess is the town like football team or whatever, which is also just like a nice thing. Other than that, the town is really weird, right? It's set up like there's a newsstand, like New York City style, which seems super out of place.
Well, it's a fake town. It was all a set that they built on some guy's ranch in New Mexico.
Well, yeah, I know, but it's got this feel, and I don't know.
But it looks like it. Yeah. That's the weird thing.
Oh, it does, and I'm not sure if they were going for this thing because the film's set in New Mexico, and we're supposed to. Because I've always thought of it as like an analog for Roswell, because like there's all this weird stuff going on around, and the government's there, and they're not, and like I kind of felt like it was supposed to be like it's this town that was like just out there because weird stuff happens in the desert, and so people moved out there, and so they're pretty used to all of the weird stuff. Like because I don't think it's normal, or at least not to me, that if a thing falls out of the sky, you go with your buddies and a bunch of pickup trucks and beer and try to pull it out of the ground.
I don't know. I could definitely see some people that I knew back in Mississippi trying to do that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that was an amazing cameo from your boy Stan Lee.
Oh yeah, this is actually one of my favorite Stan Lee Marvel cameos. The driving the truck and be like, "Did we get it?"
But yeah, so I guess after that's pretty much our general thoughts on a lot of stuff about the town. But we can go from the beginning of the movie. We talk a little bit about the pseudo origins of Thor, because that's one of the weird things about this movie. They kind of throw you into the thick of it. Like a lot of the characters are adults and kind of established. Like the beginning of the movie, you have this little scene with Odin and his 2 sons, and he's giving him the line where he's like, oh, great king doesn't look for war, but great king is always ready for it. And they're kind of learning, and you see them grow up. And Thor has the hammer, and Loki has the horns. Like they're pretty much the characters that you know from the comic books, which I was really surprised because for some reason I remember it being more of an origin story, and it's more so an origin for
you cut out
him becoming a hero, not him becoming, or it's kind of him becoming Thor, even though he's already Thor, but kind of becoming like a 100% fully realized version of the character. Because it's kind of a pseudo origins, but it's not like you follow Thor as he's a kid. Like they have that small scene with Anthony Hopkins or Odin and Loki and Thor when they're children, and he kind of gives them the spiel of, oh, a great king isn't always looking for war, but a great king is always prepared for it. Kind of instilling kind of his mentality to his children, because that's kind of what Odin's whole mission is in this movie, is passing on his knowledge to his sons. And that's really cool. And then it hops into them being, adults, and you kind of see them, as Thor and Loki and the Warriors 3, and they're all fully realized. And you kind of just have this, I guess you kind of just see the characters interact with each other, but you don't really get like, here's all the characters and here's all they're from, which I thought was pretty interesting because they kind of throw you straight into it.
They do that, and I like that they change the scale. Like the scale is so much more dramatic than in the previous movies. So like we go from, there's some scientists and they're in the desert and they're talking about some stuff, and then you get the Anthony Hopkins bit, and then you get him doing his voiceover about how a long time ago the things that people called gods were them on Earth. And you go from, like, we've had like guys that build things and they're scientists and they have these powers, to what literally have been called gods, and the scale goes from like individuals to galactic, or I guess in the case of the universe is like our first taste of the cosmic. And that you had that intro with the war with the frost giants, and they do that really well. Like it's a very good rendition. It felt like to me of the like opening battle sequence in the Fellowship of the Ring, with the two armies clashing just like in this big open plague. It's so much more epic, which I guess is fitting considering that this is an adaptation of Norse mythology into the comics universe.
Yeah, and that's one of the things in this movie that I found weird, but also I found was really perfect for a Thor adaptation to a movie, where it's like everything that has to deal with the Asgardians, the war with the frost giants, everything happening on Asgard, the crowning of a new king, all of that's played super serious and super like melodramatic, like theater.
Yeah,
and then everything on
drama.
Earth,
it's great.
Yeah, and everything on Earth is like totally different, where it's like kind of played for laugh, and it's kind of campy. Which is fun because it kind of harkens back to the older comic books, and also has this clear distinction of there's two different realms, where it's like, oh, everything that's taken seriously on Asgard is kind of goofy and weird on Earth, because people don't know what the hell he's talking about, think he's just a crazy person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that actually, because that is a good way to like distinguish, the realms without with just doing it through like personality and character. It makes sense.
And they kind of have to do that because like we've never had gods to deal with before, and so like obviously the things that they do should feel more important and grander and broader like than the things that humans do. And so because like if they hadn't done it well, they would have had a problem, I think, of sort of like power leveling, of making sense of a guy as powerful as Thor existing in the same universe with a guy who gets big and green and angry and who's like powerful, but like he can't literally control the weather. And I think they had to strike the tone of like the arch for Asgard really well, which I think they did. Like they nailed it, I think.
You know what they did with Asgard in this movie that I really liked? One of the little things about it that I noticed is they don't explain shit. They don't tell you what the Bifrost is and how it works. It's just like, oh yes, we have to cross the Bifrost to get to the new worlds and stuff like that. And like it's all shown to you and not really explained. And I like that. Oh, or especially when Odin falls into the Odin sleep. They don't explain what that is. You just have to pick it up from context. Or, or maybe they're just assuming the audience all knows about like Norse mythology or something. But like, I liked how they did that with Asgard.
Oh yeah, I think it's to their credit that they didn't treat the audience as a bunch of idiots. Like because everybody I think has, well, it's maybe a stretch to say everyone, but a lot of people have at least some knowledge of Norse mythology. So if you take your audience and just be like, well, they'll get it, and don't treat them as children, but people that know something, you get a better. I guess just treating your audience with respect, I think, is what they did there, which hasn't always been done, but I like that a lot.
Yeah, which is kind of why I think that the movie has this weird, like, I guess a lot of people view it weirdly, where it's like when you if okay, so this is my theory on why watching the movie originally I didn't really like it too much. It was kind of forgettable. I was like, oh, it's okay, it's not bad. But now watching it again with all this new context, I like it a lot more. It's because when I originally saw the movie back in like 2011, I didn't know anything about Thor. I think I had one Thor comic book when I was a kid that I got from like a garage sale, and that's all I knew. So going into this movie, it's a character that I guess similar to you, Rob, and Hulk. It's like I'm not really invested in. So I'm watching it, and you want to kind of like get to know the character, but by the time the movie starts, it's like he is Thor. He just needs to learn a life lesson. So it's like, oh, okay, I don't really get to grow with him. You just kind of get a feel for him. And then he has all these friends who kind of get, some time to shine. But, he's Thor. He's just, some Greek, Norse god. Whereas Spider-Man, whereas Wolverine, like at the time, I guess is just like he's one of the characters that I knew the least about and that I just wasn't that invested in. But now going back after the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe and seeing Dark World, Ragnarok, Avengers 1, Avengers 2, like Thor, and he's fantastic. And so when you watch this movie, just like I like this guy, I know this guy, and then I can kind of focus more on the storytelling and the world building that they did. And I was like, they did an amazing job.
Yeah, they did. It's the like treat it just as the adventure of this like really powerful guy that you'll come to know later because he's in a lot of stories and he always does cool stuff, and like that's just how he is in the mythology too. Is like he's a guy and he does a bunch of stuff, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes he's great and powerful and sometimes he's cruel and stupid, but he's still a hero at the end of the day.
Yeah, and actually something I wanted to talk about with this is so canonically, right, Thor in the Marvel universe is the Thor from the ancient Norse legends and stuff. So does that mean his character is like canonically 2,000 years old?
Yes, actually.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, however, whenever the timeline starts, I guess.
Yeah, no. So I'm just saying it's kind of funny that this is a coming of age story considering he's 2,000 years old.
Well, I mean, maybe Asgardians age differently than humans.
Yeah, like he's hitting puberty at 2,000 or whatever.
Yeah, or just wrapping that up like he.
Yeah, because this was a very like hothead, young, like late teens, early 20s kind of character, for and I mean it worked. I thought they did a good job with that story, but I just think it's kind of funny that the character is supposed to be like an ancient deity, and this is his coming of age story.
I mean, it's definitely like that because he has the whole shouting match like a teenager does with his father. He goes, "You're an old man and you're a fool," and like that's not a thing that an adult says to their parent, not generally. So, also, yeah, I like that we got the classic look the one time. Just
with the helmet?
The very beginning, yeah, and then never again because it's sort of ridiculous.
But it looks so cool.
I mean, it looks good, but it's entirely impractical.
I like the helmet.
Like, you can get rid of Captain America's wings, but don't get rid of that helmet.
Nah, I can do without. It's better with it. It's just like, it's too much. It's just approaching like costume jewelry, and I don't.
But it fits the whole Viking aspect, which I really like. Like, it plays into the legend of Thor.
Which is why I like that they showed it and then put it away, because we're past Vikings now, and we need a new modern Thor for our current era.
Yeah, the hair is like the defining thing about Thor now, which is why I haven't seen Thor Ragnarok still, but like I think it's kind of a big deal that they cut off his hair in Thor Ragnarok. Distinguishes it.
I assume it's probably a plot point that they do that, because there would no other reason that I would think to do that, because that is like it's so tied to that character. But speaking of that and his appearance and stuff in the comics, I like that they just do a slight nod to Donald Blake.
Oh yeah,
and I guess in the 60s he was originally, that was when he got sent to Earth and he couldn't remember who he was. That was the name of his alter ego.
Yeah, so back in his original origin, he was cast out and sent to Earth, and he was kind of put inside the body of a human that was already, I guess, who's already a guy. His name was Donald Blake. He was like a doctor or whatever. And it was kind of like Shazam or the Incredible Hulk, where whenever he grabbed the hammer or whenever he needed his powers, he would turn into Thor. But other than that, he was just a normal average guy.
Yeah, well, actually, he was slightly crippled because he carried around a cane, which was Mjolnir in disguise.
Yes,
and I guess that was could have been an interesting route that they had taken here, where they make him physically weaker and he has to overcome that, and through that, become worthy of the hammer again. But I do like the direction they went here instead, which is just like he can't have the hammer. He has to be better before he can have the hammer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. For this one, I believe they took a more Ultimate Thor route, where in the Ultimate comic books version of Thor, when they like kind of rejuvenized the entire Marvel universe, made him younger to kind of get new readers into it. He was sent to Earth, and people thought, similar in this movie, that he was an insane person. He was like, "Oh, I'm Thor, Odin's son, God of Thunder," but he didn't have his hammer or anything, so everybody just assumed that he was a madman. And he just ran around and nobody believed him until he got his hammer and he showed people, his power, similar to this movie. So I feel like they just went with that origins to make it a little bit, I guess, less similar to The Incredible Hulk and also easier and palatable to watch.
Okay, yeah. Oh, can we talk about, since we've already talked about him getting banished to Earth, the weapons vault, or whatever you want to call it. There's some cool nods to things in there that we're going to see later on. So the purple orb, this is one of those alcoves, is the orb of Agamotto, which is related to the timepiece that Doctor Strange has, which is
the Eye of Agamotto.
Yeah, they're related to one another, at least in the comics. Although now that the Eye of Agamotto is an Infinity Stone, I'm not sure if they are as closely linked, but at least in the comics they were related magical objects. And also there's a thing from a Spider-Man comic that's in there. There's a tablet, which is the tablet of life and time.
Oh.
Yeah, that can give somebody immortality.
Yeah, I didn't read any comic books with that, but I believe that's the same tablet that's used in the Spider-Man Shattered Dimension games that Mysterio's trying to steal, and it ends up getting shattered into pieces by Spider-Man and breaks it off into the different universes and everything.
Huh.
It's cool seeing all those little nods.
Oh yeah, it's really great. It's just like that. We get to see the first, for the first time, the Infinity Gauntlet, which was just to stoke fans wanting to see that happen. And 7 years later, and we're finally going to get some payoff on that.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
they took the long scenic route on that one.
I mean, they had to, because even with this movie, it was still not a guaranteed success. Although I think they pretty much have hit it out of the park every time since. But it was still early days for them when this came out. So.
Yep. So to break down the story a little bit, after Thor's banished, when he was banished because he decided to go to war with the Frost Giants, because in the beginning of the movie, a small kind of like, I don't know, stealth cell of the Frost Giants invaded Asgard, trying to steal what was that cube or that item called? Did they ever say what
casket?
It was? Oh yes, the casket. In order to get it back to the Frost Giants to essentially regain their power. Odin releases the Destroyer to stop that assault. But Thor is just angered in the sense that he wants to go to war to show them that they should fear Odin and Asgard, and to essentially quell them so they don't try to do something like this again. He goes off on his own with the Warriors 3, Sif, and Loki to the Frost Giants, and they have this awesome, amazing fight. And it's really cool getting to see how stronger Thor is than everyone else, and just seeing him doing a bunch of cool things with the hammer.
And it's actually now that you said it, Zach, it's sort of another moment of his hot-headed teenageness where he's going to leave, and then one guy says a mean thing to him. He's like, "Oh, now I guess I got to fight all you guys."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love Loki in that scene where he's like, "Oh shit,
yeah, oh, come on, man." Although he knew, he was goading him the whole time,
Yeah, no, it's no, that's such a teenager thing. No, man, he was talking shit. I had to do something. But
that I was just going to reference Marty McFly. You calling me chicken?
But yeah, it was really impressive seeing Thor go full power in that fight and tear up all these Frost Giants. There's a lot of nice little nods to stuff in the beginning of the movie too, which after you finish it, you realize, oh, that was a little reference to this. When the casket gets stolen, they're looking in there, Odin's like, no, this doesn't make sense. I have a peace treaty with the Frost Giants. And by peace treaty he meant spoilers for anybody listening to this who I guess hasn't seen Thor yet, but turns out Loki is was the son of the Frost Giant King.
Like a child
Yeah.
hostage, which
Yeah.
is like, good job there, Odin.
That's
Like you're a kidnapper, sort of.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
actually, I think in the beginning of the movie, when Odin is leading like Child Thor and Child Loki around, he says, "You were both born to be king," and
Oh
like
yeah,
I was thinking, like, well, obviously Thor is the one who's going to inherit the throne, but he said you're both born to be king, and I guess that was a little nod to Loki actually being the
yeah. Which
heir
the
of
like the
Frost
first go
Giants.
round, you don't even really you don't even bump on it. You're like, yeah, okay. Like, he just says that because they're both the sons, and yeah, maybe the one that's like not gonna be the hero will be the king, but it makes a lot more sense in context that it's a nice bit of writing, I guess.
Yeah, although
Yeah, it also. Oh,
I was just going to say, although like Odin being such a great dad, it's like kind of a weird thing to say to your kid, but
yeah, but I really like that. Okay, so because one of the things that I did notice, there's a lot of similarities to another piece of fiction, Game of Thrones, in this. When I was watching it, so I guess a little spoilers, not really, but it's like early seasons of Game of Thrones. Like first thing is that the Frost Giants are very reminiscent to the White Walkers. Like they look very similar. I noticed that when I was watching, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And then also the fact that Loki is kind of a prisoner of war, where he's kind of held as a hostage, is similar to uh, Theon with the Starks,
yeah,
which I thought was like just interesting seeing how that's kind of is a thing that happened in history, where you would take the firstborn so that your, I guess, line of succession is kind of in distraught because I have your heir essentially, which is a thing that I really like. And I also like the story of Thor and Loki throughout this movie, where Odin, I guess, okay, so Thor wants to be like his father, and kind of like what we referenced before, he is kind of like a petulant teenager, and he's like, I just want to be the warrior. I want to, my father to be proud of me. I want to fight, and drink, and be kind of the stereotypical Norse god. They want to have a glorious death and, go to Valhalla and drink and eat with the legends of history. And then on the other spectrum, you have Loki, who is very sly, debonair. He's very, manipulative, and he's always in the background whispering things in people's ears. And you see that throughout the entire movie. He plays everyone, which is what make there's two things that make him a really a really compelling villain. Is that he's constantly in people's ears doing his job essentially, and throwing a lot of misdirects and also manipulations throughout the characters, and just goading them a little bit and pushing them into the direction that he wants them to go into. And also at the same time, he's very compelling in the sense that you feel for him because he finds out this truth about him. I'm sure he had to deal with, when he was growing up, people hating the Frost Giants, and throughout the movie finding out that he is actually one of them, that was abandoned by his father because he was too small, and also lied to by his his supposed father, Odin, that he was one of, the Asgardians the entire time. He feels like disenfranchised. So it's totally believable why he would do the things that he would do. And he is Loki, the god of mischief, so it's also how he does it is perfect. It's just, they just got that character so right. And Tom Hiddleston's portrayal, where he looks Slytherin as fuck, like he looks slimy.
I mean,
he
he
looks
is.
Slytherin.
He
He
definitely
does.
is. To
He
use your
totally
phrasing,
does.
he's Slytherin as fuck. Like it's wild, and it's a perfectly like compelling reason for him to be that way. Because like he had to have known or had a feeling his whole life that, because he wasn't as strong as other Asgardians. He wasn't as like he's not built like the other Asgardians. He's not a big dude. Like he had to rely on other gifts because he couldn't match them physically, and like he wouldn't know why, but he had to feel like there was something wrong with him, I guess, probably. And so of course that drove him to move in a direction away from the regular Asgardian ideals of we're manly men.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where you get that scene with him and Odin on the stairs, where he's screaming at him, where he's like, I was never going to get the throne. You always wanted Thor to get it, and yada yada yada. It's because I think that like all of that hit him so hard, and that he had probably his suspicions and his doubts in the past, and now he finally has confirmation of it. He's like, everything my dad did and everything that he told me was a lie.
While we've been talking about Loki, I had two thoughts. First of all, if they ever do a movie where there's going to be a younger version of Snape in the Harry Potter universe, That should totally be Tom Hiddleston.
Yes, he was perfect.
Oh man, he would be pretty good at that.
Second thought I had is, like this is kind of a thing in comics too, right? Like sons being traded like this, or sons being raised by another father. Because, I mean, for one thing, Superman, but like also those characters in DC Comics, where Darkseid's son and
Oh, the New Gods. And all that.
the New Gods, where Darkseid's son and the New Gods switch kids and like raise them that way, and I'm like, that always seemed weird to me, but I guess it kind of makes sense with like some of the themes they're going with. It just seems to be a regular theme in comics apparently. Maybe Jack Kirby has something to do with this. Maybe this is a thing with him.
Well, it might be. But it was also, like Rashad said earlier, a pretty common tactic for years and years and years in our own human history. Back at the time of the Vikings and people like that, like it was not uncommon for somebody that you fought a war with at the end to either trade, like take a hostage, or have your families marry together to prevent future war. So it
seemed like it's one of the biggest bargaining chips. It's like, I took your legacy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was super compelling, and I feel like all of the Asgardian characters were, like, throughout the movie you really get a sense of who they are. At the beginning of the movie, it's kind of hard. I feel like it's kind of just like, here's Thor, here's Loki, here's the Warriors 3, here's Sif, here's Odin, and there's just like all these characters in this huge cast, and they're doing things. But then as the movie goes on, especially when you get those big moments where it's like Loki realizing that he is a frost giant, and especially when he's having like that final scene where he's like yelling at Thor, and you see that one tear come out of his eye. And I'm just like, holy shit, Tom Hiddleston is so good.
Yeah, I had never seen him in anything before this, and I was sold.
Definitely not the kind of movie that we would be talking about on this podcast. But you guys ever seen Midnight in Paris?
I have not seen that.
No, it's a Woody Allen directed movie, and it's like this character goes back and forth between modern day Paris and 1920s Paris, and Tom Hiddleston plays F. Scott Fitzgerald in that, and I was like, oh, he's really good.
Oh yeah. Man, that sounds awesome. Really? I have a thing with Woody Allen where I don't know if I can watch that movie.
Yeah,
Woody Allen's, yeah. All right, anyway, let's get away from that topic.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about.
But I like Tom Hiddleston as an actor, and also if you ever read some of the stuff he talks about playing Loki, he loves playing Loki. He is so happy to be part of this universe, and I think that's great.
And you can tell he seems like the happiest person. It was like him and RDJ seem like the happiest people in whatever movie they're in.
Yeah.
And it's actually, I think he derives joy from it the way that a person playing a heel in wrestling does.
Oh yeah.
Like he is a heel. Like he could be good. Like he could be a face if he wanted to, and sometimes he pretends to be, and that's why he's so good, because he's like, oh man, I'm here to help this time. Nah, just kidding. I'm Loki. And so he's the heel, and he's just so good at it. Let's talk about a thing that didn't work the first time for me in the movie and still doesn't, and it's Jane Foster.
Yeah, no, I knew we were gonna have to get to this eventually.
Yeah, I was wondering when we were gonna get here.
So here's the thing: you can take her out of the movie, you still have a movie.
Yeah,
she doesn't need to be there. Like, she doesn't drive. Anybody with a truck could drive Thor out to hammer.
Yeah, honestly, I think not to be a dick, but I kind of feel like if Natalie Portman wasn't in this movie and it was all just Selvig drying Thor around, I'd like it way more.
It would be more interesting, because they have this weird romantic subplot where she falls in love with him in 36 hours, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that all happened super quickly. And
look,
what
you guys don't understand. Jane Foster is a compelling character. She is driven by science and the dick. You should get it. That's it. That's her whole life. It's science and dick. That's all she wants. She a simple woman with simple needs.
Oh man.
I guess my love for science is almost as great as my love for the dick.
I was not expecting you to say that, but
nobody's going to listen to this podcast now.
It's
it's kind of evident.
I guess you could and I'll make the argument, even though I don't see why she's there. You could make the argument that that makes sense because he's a mythological character, and in stories like that, people fall in love immediately all the time. And if we want to treat it as he's Thor, and it doesn't matter they didn't have the hammer, he still gives off this like presence. Fine, but it doesn't work for me. I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel believable because it's too easy to me. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, Thor's very charming and everything, and he's shirtless like half of the movie. But
That's the real appeal there. He doesn't have a magical charm. It's just Chris Hemsworth shirtless.
It's just this 10-pack.
I guess maybe it's also like they want as much audience in seats as they can, and so Natalie Portman is a known actress, and people will go see her.
She is a big draw, and actually, even though I don't like how she does in this movie, I love Natalie Portman as an actress.
Oh yeah, I think she's great.
Same
Like
here.
she's really good in a lot of stuff. Like she's great in V for Vendetta. She was really good in Black Swan. Like
I loved her in Black Swan.
yeah, she's fantastic. I don't like her in the way like if they do like they have in the comics. I don't want her to be Thor.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. Because I don't know who else would take up the mantle. Kat Dennings couldn't do it. She couldn't even pronounce the hammer.
Oh, Mew Mew. Goodness
Which is
gracious.
Actually,
one of the best lines of the movie.
Again, not to be a dick, but like, did her character really need to be there either?
No, neither one of them.
No.
Like it could have just been Selvig. It really could have. Because he's a funny guy. He's a really good actor. He's one of those Skarsgårds that are in everything.
Yeah, no, I like him as an actor a lot.
I can't remember if he's the uncle or the father of Bill, who played.
He's the father. Yeah, because he's the father of Pennywise.
Yep.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Skarsgård. That's the most Viking ass name.
Yeah. What is
this is why it's perfect that he's like, I remember these stories when I was a child, because he probably does.
Sweden has low key been shitting out some great actors.
It low key has.
Yeah.
Did you?
Oh no, that wasn't intentional.
I was about to say, are you proud of that?
No, didn't try to do that. Sorry. Like Mads Mikkelsen, right? He's Swedish, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I think so.
He?
Oh, never mind. He's Danish. My bad.
Oh well,
okay.
I mean, it's still Viking country.
Yeah, no, we're still up there in Scandinavia, but like some great actors coming out of that weird part of the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have all this stuff with Jane Foster and Thor's relationship. You have the Loki subplot of him betraying the throne and also trying to manipulate essentially everyone. You also have the Warriors 3 kind of in the background trying to decide what they're going to do. And, during all of this, you kind of just have Thor's journeys on Earth, enjoying Midgard, which was fun. I had an enjoyable time. Like you said, Jane Foster and Kat Dennings, or Darcy, I believe is her name in the movie. They don't really add too much, but you do get some hijinks, a little bit of fun, a little bit of campiness, which is great. It kind of has this like smaller feel, whereas like Iron Man is like big and bombastic, and then in Hulk is more like it's also kind of big because he's such a like big character, where it's like it's big action fights with the army and everything, and this movie is more like condensed because most of the story happens in this small town.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? We talk about the scale at the beginning. Asgard is like it's this high and mighty place on a plane all its own, and then he comes to Earth, and like everything is very small. And so it's a matter of the cosmic versus the mundane, and so it makes sense for everything to happen in this small town and everything very close to it. And yeah, there are nice moments, like the moment in the diner where he has a breakfast and he smashes the coffee cup and
another.
Oh, yeah. And I like the bit where he goes into the pet shop and he asks for a and they're like, we've got like dogs and birds, and he's like, give me one of those big enough to ride. And I was like,
yeah,
I
the
like
guy behind the counter. He's just not there for that. He's like, why are you here, man?
Yeah,
I've worked retail before. That's how I'd be. Like,
oh yeah.
But like, I like the implication that in Asgard that would be a real thing. Like they could give him a bird big enough to ride or a dog.
Well, I mean, they definitely could give him a dog big enough to ride, because in the trailers for Ragnarok they have Fenrir, which is the great wolf. So like large animals are pretty regular for Asgardians. So
and it's like a little one-liner at the end of the movie, but I did like how at the end of the movie when Thor is saying goodbye to Coulson, he calls him Son of Coal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
that was great.
I love that bit. I totally missed that the first couple times I've seen this movie too, because I didn't realize it until now. I'm like, oh, that's a nice line. I like that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
a
a throwaway
good
line.
joke about Scandinavian naming traditions.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so this is another movie where Coulson is in. He's just sprinkled throughout all of the Marvel movies, apparently. For some reason, I did not pick up on that my first time around. Like, to see that he is like this thread in a similar vein that Rosario Dawson is for the Marvel Netflix TV shows. He is the thing that that brings all the characters together, which makes his pivotal scene in Avengers, which we'll be talking about in a few weeks, like even more like retroactively, it's more weighty, and it's just I don't know. Marvel did such a masterful job. Like I know I was talking about, or we were talking about earlier, like we just want the Avengers now. We see all the breadcrumbs and all these like seeds that they've been planting. We want it now, but Marvel did it the right way, where they took their time and they slowly cultivated this universe, and then had this huge payoff in the the big team movie. And it's just like you get to see everything like Coulson's throughout the movies. You have the cameo from Hawkeye in this movie, which is really cool because you have him when Thor's trying to retrieve his hammer after being on Earth for maybe a few days. The hammer lands, and everyone, we talked about the scene earlier with Stan Lee's cameo where everyone's trying to pick up the hammer and they're having like a cookout, and it's like a great old time. And when he finds out the Mjolnir has landed on Earth, he tries to go and retrieve it. But at that time, S.H.I.E.L.D. has already set up shop trying to examine and figure out what this, unidentified object is. And Thor has his like weird Metal Gear Solid ass espionage mission to try and go get back his hammer. And throughout this entire time, you have Coulson, and also he calls in Hawkeye, which they had a nice scene where he goes for the gun, like the rifle, and then he stops and he grabs the bow. It's just like, they do it Hawkeye. That was awesome.
Yeah,
and he's just kind of like watching.
I think it is nice, like you were saying, that they've been weaving this tapestry together, and it's about all the heroes that we get to see in Avengers, but also they were slowly building the legend of Coulson that we didn't really know who he was, and he wasn't like super important until Avengers when a thing happens. And but they had done enough. He'd been around and like in the background enough that people had like been drawn to him, and because he kind of feels like an audience stand-in because all this weird stuff's happening, and he's just like, I'm here to do my job and try and figure it out, and you're just making life difficult, Norse god guy.
Yeah. No, I mean
one of my. Oh, sorry.
No, I mean like the thing. I don't know the actor's name, but like the guy who plays Coulson. His whole thing is that he just comes across like the most normal person possible.
Yeah.
His name's Clark Gregg.
That's such a normal name, Jesus.
Yeah,
that's
right?
such. Like he's like that. You ever see Idiocracy where they have the dude who is like somehow statistically average in everything? That's that guy.
Well, he is just the perfect suit, like he's great.
Which is crazy because you see him in all these movies and he's the S.H.I.E.L.D. guy. He's like the face of S.H.I.E.L.D. right now, while Nick Fury is kind of playing his cards in the background. And he has all these little good moments, but he doesn't really come into his own until the Avengers movies, where you get to kind of see Coulson as a character, kind of like he's in the movies, but he doesn't actually become like an active character into that movie. And it's great because you see him all the time. You're just like, so this is the guy.
I haven't watched any of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I kind of want to just because Coulson's in it.
Oh, you should. That's the only reason I ever started watching any of it is because of him.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty good. And
apparently, I didn't know. I was doing some reading after I watched the movie last night. The reason that he has this as large a role in this movie that he does, and then a larger role going forward, is that Marvel was in contract dispute with Samuel L. Jackson at the time, and they wanted him to be in Thor, but they were arguing over money or whatever, and so they couldn't get him. So they offered the role to Clark Gregg instead, and the rest is, as they say, history.
Yeah, and it's crazy how serendipitous stuff like that is. where these little, I guess at the time, which would be like wrenches in the plans, can actually come out and work out in, I guess, the grander scheme's favor, because like he really does tie everything together. And he's great. Like Coulson is one of my favorite characters, and he's not a major player. He's just a great average guy that's just trying to do his best in a similar vein as Black Widow and Hawkeye, but he's not a super like manipulative spy. He's not like the perfect guy who never misses a shot. He's kind of just like the top human guy who's just around everybody trying to keep everything under control and trying to do his job.
Yeah, he's great. I don't know what we would do without Coulson. He keeps everything together. He's like the glue, you know.
Yeah.
Also, we haven't talked about one of my favorite low key characters, to make the joke again because it's just not going away now. Heimdall.
Oh, yeah. Idris Elba.
Oh, you do. Just he's so good in everything he's ever been in, and there's a fun joke that. Because when he was cast as Heimdall, it pissed off some people.
Yeah. Because
in like actual Norse mythology, Heimdall was described in some of their text as the whitest of all Norse gods. And so I thought it was really funny when they cast him, and it pissed off some of those like alt-right folks, you know. And it's kind of great, and he's really really good because he sympathizes with Thor and the Warrior Three and stuff like. He has this job, and he's supposed to be this staid, like, imposing figure. But there's just a little bit. He's like, I've never been able to not see something, so I won't tell anybody. Just go do a thing. And so he's really good in this.
You know what I was saying about how one of the things I liked about how they did Asgard is that they show you everything without really, like, explaining it.
Right.
They kind of keep indicating that Heimdall is, like, a very powerful character. But they never really like actually like show it to you deliberately or explain it. They just keep showing like everybody has a great deal of respect for Heimdall. Everybody kind of like stays a little bit back from him because they know he's dangerous. He's like the one like hold up with invading Asgard, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
And he's super. Okay, so at this point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's only one unaccounted for Infinity Stone, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Soul Stone, and in the comics, it's orange. Also, his eyes are orange. Does he have the Soul Stone?
Don't do that to me, man.
Yeah.
Like has he had it the whole time? And he's gonna have to get killed.
Don't play with us like that.
I'm just saying, like I it's not my theory, but I read it a while back, and
I do think it's a little like, okay, so obviously they kept focusing on his eyes because he has this magical power where he can see anything that he focuses on, even if it's in another dimension or whatever. Right. But you know, why are his eyes orange? I don't know. So
well, I mean, it's awfully coincidental that stone is orange, at least in the comics, and his eyes are orange.
Man, maybe they just picked a color. Maybe they just.
Why would they just pick a color when like they were in Iron Man 2, they had like a thing about Wakanda. Like they've been seeding this universe for years.
I don't know. It's possible. No. Wait, I'm gonna look at Idris Elba's IMDb page real quick. Let me.
Okay, but yeah, I do want to talk a little bit about Heimdall because, like y'all were saying, they throw out little subtle hints, and I love like the subtlety in his like characterization. Where it's like, you know, you find out that he has the power to see all. You know, he is the Watcher of Asgard, and he's like the only guard. You don't see anybody else there at the Bifrost. He runs it by himself, which is indicative of like he's powerful. And then you have these, you know, little lines where Loki is talking to him. He was like, "I'm your king. You gotta listen to me." And he was like, "You know, you're very powerful in your own right, Heimdall. Has my father ever feared you?" And he, you know, he says the line where he's like, "No, I am loyal to my king. I would never betray him." He was like, "Okay, cool." And then you have the scene at the end where, you know, the casket has been freezing, or when they show the big scene of the war at the beginning, the frost giants have the casket and they freeze everyone on Earth and they start the war. It's just like, oh, this is a big thing. And then in the third act of the movie, when Loki turns the casket on Heimdall and he's frozen, and he has that big moment where he's needed and he's just yelling.
Oh, he's so badass. He can yell himself on a block of ice.
Idris Elba's voice, I don't know what they did. Like, his voice is already amazing, immaculate.
Oh, they
But
took
they
it down
put
like a
on
whole register. It's insanely deep
and
and
it's
bassy.
so good.
Yeah.
And then that moment where he's like, he breaks free. I was just like, oh my god, so awesome.
Yeah. It's
and it's
super
just
cool.
this little understated moment, but he breaks free. I'm just like, Heimdall's the best.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the only time we actually see him fight in the whole movie, or like do anything like besides opening up the Bifrost with his sword as a key. But like it shows like there really is like his character is implied to be very powerful. So
Yeah.
Okay, I looked at his IMDb page. I don't see Infinity on here, but apparently they're making a Dark Tower TV series. I don't know how I feel about that.
You just looked up some bad news. But yeah, so we talked about pretty much the majority of the movie. A lot of his, I mean, the through line throughout this movie is just kind of Thor's redemption story. So he's very hot headed and rash at the beginning of the movie, which leads to him going to the Frost Giants and starting a war. Odin disciplines him by banishing him, but in typical Odin fashion, at least from the comic books and also in the movies, he did it for a reason, and he knows what's going on. You find out throughout the movie, like I think his wife, I forget her name,
Frigga.
but yes, Freya.
Yeah.
She says that she's like, Odin doesn't do anything without a reason. He has a plan for everything. And in that moment where he banishes Thor, he also puts the enchantment on Mjolnir, which is actually pretty funny or interesting because from what I know of the comic books, the enchantment has been on the hammer since it was created by the dwarves. So to have it where Thor kind of like gets the hammer and he's just wielding the power without having to become worthy, and then having to gain that worthiness throughout the movie by learning humility, to learn that it's not just his life on the line, that he has to protect the people around him. That's not just about fighting and dying, valiantly. It's about protecting and leading people and, self-sacrifice. And he learns that throughout this movie by interacting with people that he, normally would be, seen by him beneath him because he is Thor, God of Thunder. And so I think that like his character growth is great throughout the movie, especially in those moments where like Loki told him that Odin had passed when he was manipulating him.
Something.
And he has this really somber moment where I was like, this is really, really good.
Not that he was intending this at all, but I was thinking about this before we had this podcast. I don't think Thor would have had his character growth moment if it wasn't for Loki lying to him.
That is true.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like Loki meant it for his own gain, but it absolutely was part of the reason that like Thor's like, oh man, I the last time I saw my father, he was kicking me out of my home because I messed up real bad, and now I can't ever take that back.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Loki pushed him down and like was saying all this shit to him, but that is what spurred Thor on to like rethink things and like change himself and think about himself as a person. So good on Loki for doing that.
Yeah, it's actually like there's a moment when there's a word that's used in literature to kind of describe that is it's like a moment of eucatastrophe, like good coming out of bad. It's like that's a perfect example of Loki is like you're gonna stay here forever, and then it turns out that is the impetus that Thor actually needs to become the guy worthy of the hammer. Mm-hmm. So it's great.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that typical nerd conversation about who can and can't lift Thor's hammer. But I thought it was like I like what you were saying, Rashad, about like the whole idea in this. Thor was not worthy. He was definitely not worthy when he started out, and he was able to enjoy this power for such a long time. And then he had to become worthy, and then that is just something that's like part of the hammer now. And so I thought that's kind of like funny, because if he ever slips up and he gets like selfish and arrogant again, he won't be able to do anything with the hammer.
Yeah, which is actually kind of what the story is now. So from the time this movie came out to now, I have become a little bit more well-versed with Thor as a character. I read this amazing run by Jason Aaron that he did of Thor. and he did like this whole God Killer arc, which is so good. And essentially, I'll give it a short synopsis. Thor meets up with this guy called the God Killer, who is going around, or the God Butcher, and he's going around killing every god that he can come across because he was essentially betrayed by his god. So he lived on a planet that was dying, had a like this wild drought. All these people were dying, but they all were praying to their gods, and nothing happened. And then he kind of goes through this crisis of faith once his wife and his child dies, and he ends up getting obtaining this power, and he uses that to take down every god that he can, and he fights Thor. So they have this amazing battle. This whole storyline goes on. It's amazing, and then at the end of the day, Thor wins, and it goes through which is interesting because we kind of talked about how old Thor is, but it goes through different generations of Thor. So there's pre-Hammer Thor, where he's young, rash Viking guy, is the current Marvel Universe Thor, and is also old King Thor. And they all have to work together, and this is an amazing story. It's like epic and everything is great. But when you flash forward, in the most recent kind of run right before Jane Foster became Thor, Thor loses the ability to wield the hammer, and he becomes unworthy. And how this happened is Nick Fury walks up to Thor and he whispers something in his ear, and ever since he whispered that thing into his ear, he was no longer worthy to hold the hammer. And you find out later in the run that he whispered the God Butcher was right, and that shook Thor. And that's the interesting thing with the character is he has flaws. He's still Thor. He's still this rash, I want to battle, I want to fight. And you can see that in the later movies, where he meets up with other characters, and his first action is to swing his hammer. And at any moment that he slips up, he can lose his powers, which is interesting as a character, where it's if you become a bad hero, you lose the thing that gives you the ability to fight and the ability to do everything that you want to do.
Yeah. Whereas
other superheroes, they would just be able to do bad things. So it's nice that he has that, I guess, limiter on him, which is interesting for the character.
Man, I just Googled some of the stuff you were talking about. I really wish I could quit my job and just read comics for a few weeks or something.
Dude, anything Jason Aaron touches is fantastic, and that run is probably one of the greatest pieces of literature I've probably read in general. It's so good.
Yeah, no, I just Googled some stuff and I've been looking at it. I'm like, man, I need to read more comics. Wish I didn't have to work. But going back to the hammer and the whole thing about the hammer. So we're going to talk about this eventually, but that scene which everybody loved in the second Avengers movie where they're all at the party in Stark Tower and they're trying to lift the hammer. Mm-hmm. And the Thor is the only one who's able to lift it in the movie. But there was two things in there that were pretty cool. One is that Black Widow didn't try. She never tried to lift the hammer. But the other thing is that Captain America tried to lift the hammer and it shifted slightly, but then he wasn't able to actually lift it. And
Thor's face at that moment was fantastic.
Oh yeah, I love that bit. But I was thinking, and apparently people have talked about this online, but in what way is Captain America not as worthy as Thor to hold the hammer? But apparently one of the rules about Mjolnir and about what it takes to wield Mjolnir is clarity of purpose. Yes. You have to have clarity of purpose in order to wield Mjolnir. I mean, there's other stuff too about selflessness and heroism and the willingness to sacrifice and fight and stuff.
Which Cap definitely doesn't have at that moment because he and Tony are fighting about what's the right direction.
Yeah, but that's the thing is that clarity of purpose Captain America did not have at that moment. So I'm hoping, because I would love to see this, I'm hoping that leads to a scene in another movie where Captain America wields the hammer.
Well, canonically in the comics, he has lifted the hammer.
Yeah, he has.
Granted, that's comic book stuff because Deadpool has also lifted the hammer, so who knows?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, that's the overriding thing for Deadpool is that clarity of he knows who he is and what he is, and he's about that 100%.
Yep.
And so that's why he gets to carry the hammer, even though he's ostensibly a bad guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of the loophole with the enchantment on Mjolnir. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ending. I had somehow forgotten the ending of the movie where Loki locks off the Bifrost to destroy Jotunheim. And I saw something in the scene that I had never seen before. Right before, like I guess I never noticed where the ice that encases the lightning came from. He uses the like chest of the ice, the frost giants, to do that. I had never noticed it before, but he does the same thing that he does when he freezes Heimdall. He does that like flourish to open it up and then close it again. And I had never caught that. I don't know how I missed it, but and then the fact that he and Thor fight. I just didn't remember that them fighting and him breaking off the Bifrost.
Yeah, that final fight was amazing. Like, I really enjoyed it. I just remember the destroyer fight, which that was cool too. But I was like, oh, he's just kind of this faceless automata. So I was like, I didn't remember the final fight, and I guess that's why a lot of people, it kind of solidified that Loki was the greatest Marvel villain that they had at the time, because he's so good and he's so like sympathetic, but also he's the bad guy, but he plays it so well, and that he's kind of torn the entire movie.
Well, that like the moment that you really know it is when he takes the throne and the Warriors 3 come up and they're like, "Hey, can we get Thor back now?" And as soon as he's gotten on the throne, he has that turn. He goes, "Well, now I can't do that. My first command can't be to undo my father's."
And yeah, I love that line.
You dirty bastard.
Oh yeah, because that's one of Loki's like things, like both from mythology and the comics, is he is silver-tongued. He knows how to talk. He knows how to bullshit.
Yeah, and it's like that's the perfect moment of that in this movie. He's just like, I can't undo what my father did. What kind of king would I be?
I mean, one of the things that...
Well, I mean, I don't want to cut you off, but like something else Loki said during that final fight with Thor on the Bifrost that kind of like surprised me, because I remember the fight, but I didn't remember that line, is when Thor starts trying to destroy the Bifrost to stop Loki. One of the things Loki yells at Thor is, "You'll never see her again." Yeah. And like I that kind of caught me, because it's like it shows that Loki really does understand like other people. He understood like that the effect that Jane had on Thor in a very short amount of time. He understood what was motivating Thor, but he didn't understand just how much Thor was willing to sacrifice. So
yeah, which is what you need to be able to be a master manipulator. Mm-hmm. You have to know the person inside and out, mm-hmm. and be able to think like them and be able to plan 3-4 steps ahead. But he wasn't able to plan for Thor. That the reason why he was able to wield the hammer was that he has learned self-sacrifice. He was willing to give that up to stop him. And I think that was when Thor outthought Loki, or he just didn't think enough steps ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with Loki, is that he'll never achieve capital G greatness, because it would never occur to him to sacrifice something of himself for the greater good, because the greatest good for Loki is himself.
But one of the things that really kind of solidified the characters of Loki and Thor in my head is Odin, and Anthony Hopkins' amazing portrayal of Odin in this movie. When he's kind of talking to both of his sons throughout the movies, he's trying to teach them. And as you watch through the movie, it's kind of it's really fatherly, because he has this whole kind of mentality of do as I say, not as I do. And when you take that phrase, Loki is more of the do as Odin says. He's learned from Odin's teachings. He's following, like, you have to be able to rule. You have to be able to make hard decisions. Whereas Thor is more do as I do. So he's more like, oh, Odin was this great, powerful warrior. He went to war. He crushed everyone that, opposed him. And he took, control of the 9 realms by force. And they're kind of, Thor and Loki are kind of the two halves of the same coin that is kind of Odin. Like, his teachings, they've both taken, different pieces of his teaching, and only throughout the movie does Thor kind of learn the full meaning of everything that Odin was trying to tell him throughout the movie, which is why I believe that Thor prevailed over Loki, because Loki wasn't willing to, try to take that next step to becoming the great man that Odin wanted both of them to be. But, Thor was able to realize that and become the true, heir of Odin.
Yeah, they're both one half of what Odin is, and only Thor has so far successfully integrated both sides of what made Odin so great.
Yeah. I mean, Thor might not have been the best person to succeed Odin and be king, but his greatest strength is that he was able to learn a lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it only took him 2,000 years.
Yeah. All right, that's still kind of hard for me to get over. It's like, and then it only took, what would you say, Rob? Like 36 hours for everything to change.
Oh yeah, it's super fast. Like it's not even
Yeah.
2 whole days.
No, it's like, so you spent 2,000 years being this guy, but all it took was 1 weekend. 1 weekend in New Mexico.
It's wild out
Hey,
here.
New Mexico it's the land of enchantment. That's like
Yeah.
their state motto. So
Enchanted.
it must be true.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also before I forget, we get our first view of an Infinity Stone in this movie.
Yep.
In the stinger at the end.
Yep. And the stinger at the end, we have Eric Selvig getting taken to the S.H.I.E.L.D. like secret underground base. He meets up with Nick Fury, and he shows him the Cosmic Cube. And during that moment where Nick Fury is telling him that, hey, we found this powerful artifact that will give us unlimited power, you see in the reflection of the glass Loki.
Oh, man.
And Loki starts to manipulate Eric right at the end. And they both say the same line.
Yep.
This is interesting. And I was like, ooh, that was so good.
Yeah, it was nice that they went ahead and told the audience that he wasn't gone for good.
Yeah, I guess falling into space didn't really do a whole lot to him,
Well, he fell into the waning power of the Bifrost, so it took him somewhere, and he knew ways to get around the universe without the Bifrost. So
and he made friends, as we find out in Avengers.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So I guess the final takeaway is that I think this is the first movie we've all agreed at the end that we liked it a lot better this time around than the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's funny. We all kind of went into it not expecting that much after all these years, but we all ended up being kind of like pleasantly surprised. Rashad, you mentioned Game of Thrones earlier. I think one of the writers for Game of Thrones actually worked on this.
Are you serious?
I think so. I'm not sure. It was like one of the screenwriters or something might have been in on this. I'll look that up later.
Because the Theon Loki parable, and also the fact that the Frost Giants look eerily similar to the Whites, it's just like, I don't know.
I don't know if the screenwriter would have had influence and all that, but I think there might be a little bit of a connection.
Yeah, it's cool. Everything's connected somehow. It's like the 3 steps of Kevin Bacon or whatever. I can't remember what it's called.
6
Something
degrees.
like that.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's our review of Thor. I really enjoyed it the second time around. I was happily surprised. Like, this movie really, really just changed my whole mind on the beginning of the Marvel Universe. Like, seeing it all again and kind of going back and having all this stuff change retroactively because of all the new context that we have. It really made these older movies so much better because that all the work that they did laying this groundwork for all the movies that have come after it and all these big cinematic moments that we've had in the big team up movies and everything that they plan going forward. Like, Marvel, like, it's just like a mastercraft. They did such an amazing job. So I think I'm really interested on seeing how I think of Captain America next week.
Yeah, after this, because like this one so far has it's held up the best, I think, of the original run.
I was so pleasantly surprised by this, and I'm looking forward more to Captain America next week now because I don't remember Captain America all that well, the first one, the first Avenger one, but maybe I'll be surprised because that's what happened with this.
Yeah, I actually am looking forward to that a lot more because of this too. So, But yeah, thanks everybody for listening again with us this week.
And if you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on the iOS podcast app, leave us a review and a rating. Let us know how we're doing. You can check out the podcast every week, Saturday, hopefully at noon. That's when I'll have it up. And hey, we'll keep going to infinity.
Yeah.
See you guys next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.